Welcome back to Candy's Classic Game Shrine, everyone. It's another episode of Tinker Time DIY. And a lot of you folks know me as the Virtual Girl. And that's because, well, I made this Virtual Girl. And a lot of you have either met me at conventions or just watched my videos about this pink little custom Virtual Boy that I made. And a couple years ago, a person by the name of Wesk uploaded 3D scans and files of the Virtual Boy console, and they're 3D printable. So I went ahead and I made a second Virtual Girl, and I completely 3D printed that one, but I never documented how I did it because I didn't think people would be interested in my process. But completely underestimated that. Tons of people wanted to see what my methods were, how I did it, and so I went back, redid everything, and now there are 3 Virtual Girls in existence. The first one I gave to Adam Koralik as a birthday gift because he was the first signature on this one, and this one is just for the purposes of the video. So yeah, let's go. I'll show you how it's done. First things first, I want to stress the importance of doing this in a well-ventilated area and using PPE like a mask and goggles to avoid breathing in any nasty crap or getting it in your eyes. Being able to see and breathe is pretty important, so don't skimp out here. The basic materials you're going to need are a 3D printer, a slicing program for your computer, 3D printer filament. For this project, I used ABS, files to print out, spray filler, primer, paints, and clear coats, custom Virtual Boy or Virtual Girl logo vinyls, a respirator mask, safety goggles, a Dremel or sandpaper or a file, tweezers, an X-Acto knife, painter's tape, flush cutters, and newspaper or any paper to wrap up your shell. As for the specifics of the items I used, my 3D printer is a FlashForge Adventurer 5M Pro. The filaments that I used are the Overture brand ABS filament and the Nova Maker brand ABS filament. The slicing program that I used to prepare the files for the printer is called Orca FlashForge. The files for the Virtual Boy shell and other parts can be found on the Planet Virtual Boy forum. As for the custom speaker covers that I made, those are on Thingiverse and Cults 3D as well. I'll provide links to everything in the description below. The paints that I used are all different brands since they just happen to be what I had on hand at the time. Any spray paint that's compatible with plastics will work though. I used the gray Rust-Oleum Automotive Filler Primer, the black matte Glidden Max Flex All Surface Spray Paint, and the Vallejo Acrylic Matte Spray Varnish. Unfortunately, the pink that I used on the original Virtual Girl and these is no longer being produced. It was called Pink Burst by Valspar. You might be able to have it color matched, but it's no longer commercially available. I'll try to suggest similar colors in the description. In order to make the custom logo, I downloaded the custom Virtual Boy font that Planet Virtual Boy member Runner Pack made. Once that was downloaded, I measured the original Virtual Boy logo on the actual console and asked my friend to make me a couple vinyls of the logo using her Cricut. Once all of my materials were gathered, I started loading the various files into my slicing program. These are the print and support settings that I used across all of the pieces. The only thing to change is the angle for each piece. Depending on the size and type of your printer, you might need to rotate some of the models to get a cleaner print or for them to just fit on your printer bed. For instance, this is the stand mount and it tends to print out with an uneven surface if it's printed flat. However, if you stand it up vertically, you'll get a smooth print. This will take some trial and error, but hopefully by sharing these angles and settings that I used, you'll have similar success. This is the IPD dial and focus slider and how I have them angled. The dial and slider took 1 hour and 10 minutes to print. The custom speaker covers took 3 hours and 15 minutes to print at this angle. If you want the original speaker covers, That might take slightly longer since there's an additional piece you need to print. The visor holder was angled like this, and it took 2 hours and 10 minutes to print. Here's how I angled the inner bracket. This took 2 hours and 45 minutes to print. The top shell is one of the largest pieces of this project. This and the bottom shell barely fit on my printer bed, but with some luck I was able to rotate the file in a way that it fit and didn't risk ruining the small tabs on the inside. This piece took 9 hours and 56 minutes to print. The bottom shell is the other large piece and the final piece of the project to print. Similar to the top piece, this needed to be angled in a way that fit on my printer bed and minimized the risk of breaking the fragile tabs on the inside of the shell. This piece took 12 hours and 15 minutes to print. Once each piece was finished, I removed the supports and cleaned up any rough spots with the flush cutters. There wasn't much post-print cleanup for me since I had my support density so low. Doing so allowed the pieces to be supported, but didn't make the support itself too difficult to remove. By the time the prints had cooled, the supports basically fell off on their own. If yours don't, the Dremel, sandpaper, or a file will come in handy here. Don't get caught up on trying to make it perfectly smooth with the flush cutters right now. Wait until you have the primer and filler on it first. It'll make it a lot easier to work with and smooth out. So before I go any further, I just wanted to say, I know there's a ton of other ways to smooth 3D prints. This just happens to be the method I used for this project. I was experimenting with this myself. At this time, you can begin your preparation for smoothing the print and painting it. First, make sure your pieces are clean of dirt and debris by giving them a wipe down or a shot of compressed air if you have it. After you've set up whichever piece you're going to be working with, apply several coats of the filler primer, making sure to wait between the coats so that they're fully dry. On average, it took me about 3 coats each piece to smooth the pieces out. Depending on your printer or the nozzle that you use, it may take more or less than mine did. Depending on the piece you're working with, you might find it beneficial to hang it so that it can be coated more evenly and have to be manipulated less when actively painting. The top and bottom shell, the inner bracket, and the visor holder are some of the more ideal ones to hang in my experience. For other smaller pieces, painting with pyramid stands or on a cardboard work surface are just fine. Once one piece received one coat, I moved it and its work surface and replaced it with a new piece and work surface. I repeated this process for everything, and by the time I was done with the first coat of all of the pieces, I was able to move on to the next coat of filler and primer. I repeated this process for all 3 coats of the filler and primer and gave them time to fully dry before moving on to the paint. Something to keep in mind as you're priming and painting all of your pieces is to go in short strokes over the surface of the piece. It'll prevent you from spraying too much paint and causing drips. It also allows for a much more even application in my opinion. When all of the filler and primer is dry, you can now move on to the actual painting of the console. For this project, the only colors I used were black and pink. However, if you're looking to make yours more original looking, you will also need gray for the IPD dial and the focus slider on top. The application of the paint doesn't change based on your colors though. For the painted parts, they only took about 2 coats of paint to entirely cover the pieces. Now, I know you guys are watching this video and seeing all of the snow on the ground in the video, and yes, I am doing this in the middle of the winter, and I am doing this in 30-something degree weather at the time of this video's filming, and luckily, no, I did not run into issues with the primer or paint adhering to the plastics. That mileage may vary for everyone else, but since this was just for demonstration purposes, I wasn't too concerned. I just wanted to show the process. However, luckily, it worked out just fine for me. Maybe not so much for my hands, since those were absolutely frostbitten by the end of this project. I also look like a absolute bum in this video, and I apologize, but as I just mentioned, the temperatures were super cold and I needed to stay warm while I was outside painting, and I didn't want to ruin any of my good clothes, so I threw on my PJs slash lazy clothes that I wear around the house, and you're seeing that firsthand. And I'm sorry, I probably should have put like a jump scare warning on the video, but yeah. Since it's the winter, the cold weather really screwed up my plans. If it was significantly warmer like it was when I made the first 3D printed virtual girl, I would have been able to pretty much complete the entire thing in like a day or a day and a half. But since the temperature was around like 30 degrees Fahrenheit pretty consistently, it took me about 4 days to complete this. Since I didn't have access to painting in my garage, I didn't want any overspray to get on my car, and I was way too lazy to move my car out of the garage to paint. As you can see, now I'm applying the clear coats to the pieces, and the application for the clear coat is no different than it was for the primer and the paints. This also required about 2 coats of the clear coat until I was satisfied with the finish of all of the different pieces. Okay, so we are finally approaching the last stages of our 3D printed virtual girl or virtual boy, depending on what you're printing for yourself. This is where you can apply the logo depending on which method you're going for. There are several methods in which you can apply the logo to your virtual boy or virtual girl. I have 2 different stickers here. I have them on painter's tape backing. My friend made the logos for me with her Cricut, and basically what you can do, one of these is a stencil. It's kind of hard to see through everything, and this one is just the lettering. So what you can do if you have the stencil is you can now paint your shell whatever color you want it to be final. In this case it'll be pink. Then you let it dry. You apply the logo, or the stencil in this case of the logo, and then you paint over the logo in black, but make sure that you mask off the rest of the shell. The other option is what I did the first time around for the first 3D printed one, because I did not have a stencil, and that was to get a sticker with just the lettering on it, which is what this is. Basically, in order to do that, if you don't have the stencil sticker, you want to paint your shell whatever color you want the color of your logo. In this case, I want it to be black, so I'm going to paint the entire shell black. Let that dry, apply the logo, let that sit for a minute, then apply the pink paint over it, including spraying over the sticker. And then once that is dry, you can remove the sticker carefully, and it'll reveal the black paint underneath. The option that I'm going for is using the stencil. So in order to do that, I'm going to paint the top half pink, let that dry, and then I'm going to apply the logo and mask it off so that I don't get any black overspray anywhere else. I do find it kind of crazy that this can of pink spray paint is about 10 or 12 years old now, and it's still good, and I actually had enough to do 3 virtual girls with it. I'm genuinely surprised, although I'm also really disappointed that this color no longer exists. A lot of the other similar types of colors are a little bit more salmon instead of the hot pink like this is. This is like a highlighter pink, which is what I think is ideal. Alright everyone, now is the moment that we've all been waiting for. It's time to add the logo to the virtual boy or virtual girl. So I'm going to go the method of using the stencil, and what I'm going to do here is try and line up where this real logo is to where it should be on the new shell. And then once that is on, we are going to mask off the rest of the shell so there's no overspray when we paint the logo on. Now, I know what everyone's thinking. There's way easier and tons of other ways to apply this logo that aren't as complicated, but I was lazy. I didn't feel like going back in the house for rulers and calipers and all of that, so I just eyeballed it. But overall, it came out pretty much exactly where I needed it to. Now we're going to wrap this thing up and mask it off so that none of the black spray paint that we're going to paint the logo with leak into the areas that we painted pink. I'm using newspaper, however, be aware that some of the ink may rub off. It's ideal if you use like butcher paper or like a white plain paper that's a little bit thicker so that it won't let the paint leach through, and also that it doesn't have ink that could, leach onto the thing that you just printed. Get some painter's tape or masking tape and just work your way around the system and the shell and the logo and make sure that there's no openings that any paint could leak through, because if it does, you're gonna have a bad time. If you do find that some of the ink leached onto the shell or whatever you printed, you can remove it with a very tiny amount of mineral oil, vegetable oil, baby oil, no P. Diddy, or olive oil. Just put a very small amount on a Q-tip and rub in a circular motion very gently, and you should be able to remove any of the ink that's left over. And then you go over it with a clean paper towel or cloth, and good as new. The logo only needs one coat of paint if you do it well enough. Once it's dry, you can carefully peel away the paper that you used to wrap up your system. In my case, I used some tweezers to help ease peeling off the logo vinyl, and here it is. We've revealed the new Virtual Girl logo. Now I'm adding the clear coat. The top half I gave 2 clear coats as well, like I did with just about everything else, and it is done. Now that everything is completely dry and the fumes have gassed off, you can assemble your shell. Mine is just for display, so I don't have any guts or screws to put into it. However, with the visor mount attached, it holds together really well. The only exception being the dials at the top. If you're choosing to use your shell, I would recommend using your existing screws from your Virtual Boy to create pilot holes on the new shell. They do exist on the 3D model, but they aren't well formed and absolutely need the holes to be drilled into again. Well, everyone, that was it. That was my process on how I made my fully 3D printed Virtual Girl. Now, keep in mind, you can make yours any color, any custom logo, but people wanted to see how I made my Virtual Girl, and I figured, all right, I'll make another one. So, yeah, hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for tuning in and sticking with me through it all, because this is a long one. But until next time, guys, take care.